We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're back with longtime host of Liberty Nation Radio and senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donnan. Now, earlier in the show, we spoke about a potential President Harris and Biden's poor polling numbers. And now I want to move on to Biden's track record in office and how that's going to impact voters. Tim, in 2020 and 2020, Biden could make all the promises he wanted about what kind of president he was going to be. And there was no one who could really, I guess, contradict him on that. And it covered a lot of sins with the media. But now we have almost 3 years worth of data and debacles. So do you think his record to date will be a detriment for 2024 or a plus?
Certainly a detriment. I think it's just a matter of to what degree. Now, I will say that progressives have been pleasantly surprised by his willingness to embrace radically left policies. So I think the progressive base, especially with the prospect of Trump returning, is going to be energized by anybody with a D next to his name. But especially Biden, I think, because they've gotten past the sense that he's not Bernie, he's not going to do the progressive stuff. He is doing it. Look, when he ran in 2020, he presented himself as a placeholder, a transitional figure who would, hold the White House for a rising generation of Democrats. But of course, the moment he got into the White House, he said his intent was to run for re-election. For a guy who spent 50 years in the swamp, Mark, of course, he can so seamlessly make statements and then reverse field the next week and pretend he never said it with a compliant, protective Preterian Guard.
Yeah.
Preterian Guard of a media. He doesn't have to worry about contradictions.
I'd like to make a quick point about Preterian Guards that, historically it's quite interesting. So obviously during the Roman Republic, Roman Empire, you had the Preterian Guards who would surround the notable person they were protecting. And what they would carry with them was essentially an axe head around a bundle of sticks. And this bundle of sticks was called a fasci, which is where we get the word fascist from. So that kind of gives you an idea on my opinion of Mr. Joe Biden.
Well, look, he number one, he said he was a transitional figure and implied strongly he was just running for one term.
There's a technical term for that, Tim. There is a technical term for that. It's called a lie.
Yeah, but not for a politician, Mark. There's a different standard. For example, now the Republicans have pulled out his statement during the primaries in 2020 that he guarantees they will put an end to fossil fuels. And then he claimed he never said it, that it was all a lie, even though it was right there on video. Yeah. So somebody who's been in politics for 50 years like him can just lie with utter impunity and get away with it. But to more directly to the point of what you ask, I think he's done some progressive policy maneuvers which have made Democrats happy. The Inflation Reduction Act, which doesn't have anything to do with reducing inflation, but it's a basket of goodies that the left has liked. He has pushed along sort of an anti-racist agenda because that's what's expected of him. And he's a very, shall we say, malleable politician. But the problem he's got that he can't run away from is the circular problem with the economy. And what I mean is when inflation reached up to the 9-10% level, the Fed was forced to introduce a series of rapid fire interest rate increases to reduce inflation. The problem is that will inevitably lead to a recession. And I don't mean the technical recession we have now, which is 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, but I mean a serious recession where people really feel it. It's sort of like the being on a boat and you've got a hole in the front and a hole in the back, and you go to plug the hole in the front and the one in the back starts leaking through, and then you fix that and then it comes up through the front. So it's either inflation or it's a recession. And now the biggest difference for Joe Biden from 2020 to 2024 is not just the pandemic, although that's enormous, not just the George Floyd riots, which accrued to his advantage somehow, but it is the fact that he's got a record that can be compared to Trump's. And I don't think there's any comparison when it comes to the state of the economy in the Trump administration up through March of 2020 when the pandemic hit, and the Biden economy. Now, he can try to claim that the Trump economy was getting ready to tank anyway before the pandemic came, but that's not, that will strain
Rings hollow, doesn't
it? Say the least. I think what he's got to do, frankly, Mark, is if Joe Biden is running against Trump, they believe they can win because he can just run footage of January 6th sort of on a loop tape around the clock for the entire general election campaign. But I think they might be far more hesitant to do that now that we have seen the footage released on the dearly departed Tucker Carlson's Fox show, indicating that the shaman, Jacob Chansley, was not the violent criminal that they had labeled him. He proved to be quite different than that, which means their claims on January 6th don't hold the water. They did until the release of that new footage. So, that's what they're dealing with. But Trump is someone that does scare off a significant percentage of the country. I think that's undeniable.
Well, there's the idea that with Republicans, the candidate has to appeal to the base. He has to be right in there. They have to love the contender, essentially. But with the Democrats, really, it seems to me that they need somebody that's central, because the Democrat Party is not one party anymore. I mean, they can say it's covered by a big tent, but there's some almost polar opposites there, isn't there? You point out the progressive faction were quite happy with Joe Biden, but there's a lot of fiscally responsible Democrats, maybe not in Congress, but across the country.
Sprinkled across the country. Well, look, Democrats that run in red states have to be fiscally responsible and run to the center. They have to. But in Washington, of course, it's deep blue in terms of let's put it this way. To the Democrats, as long as there's a D next to his name, it doesn't much matter. And I think we found that out with Joe Biden. And we certainly found it out with John Fetterman, the newly minted senator from Pennsylvania, who underwent a stroke, couldn't talk, started a debate by saying, "Good night, everybody." Then he did get elected. He won by 4 points in a purple state. And then he went into the hospital for clinical depression for 2 months, which is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But the point is, he had a D next to his name. And, with the media being as uncritical as they are of the left, all you have to do is have a D next to your name, it seems, in order to be viable.
Yeah, it always reminds me of the P.J. O'Rourke story, where he came back from college and told, with his long hair, and he told his grandmother, "Grandma, I'm a communist," and she says, "Well, at least you're not a Democrat." Anyway, we'll be back with Tim after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five, produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone, hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner, joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors, deconstructing leftist narratives, debating the hot topics, and remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative Five.